Before presenting our case, we would like to clarify today's motion. When we talk about the American dream, we do not mean the unrealistic or join the top 1% of society. Rather, we define it as a dominant social narrative that hard work, perseverance, and personal effort can meaningfully improve one's life. Likewise, success should not be understood as an extraordinary amount of wealth or fame, not becoming a billionaire, but success simply means achieving a better life than what was before. And whether that is obtaining a stable career, receiving education, starting a business, supporting one's family, or reaching a personal goal with one's effort, that is what we clarify as success. And now moving on to the status quo. Today, many societies are experiencing growing pessimism about social mobility. Rising inequality, economic uncertainty, and intense competition have led many people, especially the young generation, to question whether hard work will actually improve their lives. And as a result, many have become discouraged before they even begin. For example, there is a generation called the Changping generation in China and the Enpo generation in Korea, which means that they're way too tired and exhausted from the fast-moving society and the constant competition that they do not want to do anything anymore. And that is why the society needs a mechanism that goes against the self-doubt and demotivation, which in this case is the American dream. Now, moving on to my first contention. My first contention is that the American dream drives motivation and gives hope. So, our premise is simple. Human beings act based on perceived possibility. People only invest years studying, learning new skills, starting businesses, or changing careers or moving because they believe those efforts can meaningfully improve their future. When people lose that belief, motivation disappears long before their actual ability and skill does. And this is particularly important today. Why? Because as we explained in our status quo, many people are feeling exhausted by economic uncertainty and intense competition. They need emotional support to tell them that they are not a failure and that their hard work can actually pay off. And the American dream is a unique mechanism that can actually do this. This helps to create a culture where people believe that they can actually shape their own future, and they believe that their hard work actually pays off and it does not go to waste. Yes?
Can other counter narratives also encourage people? Why is it unique to American Dream?
Oh well, we're because the American dream is a very famous belief, and a lot of people have already heard about it. And the American dream is that is why it isn't a unique mechanism, and this helps because there was not any other mechanism that was as viral as the American dream. And now moving on to the impacts. People invest more in education, develop new skills, and work harder because they believe that those investments that they make have value and they can actually earn something by placing their investments. Immigrants and citizens alike are more willing to contribute productively to the economy because they see opportunities for the upward mobility. And more importantly, people become willing to take risks. They start businesses, pursue unconventional careers, or develop new technologies because they believe that their success is possible rather than impossible. Innovation only occurs when people start taking risks, changing their future, because innovation does not start out with a perfect idea, but it needs to become a perfect idea. The opposition may point out that not everyone succeeds, and we totally agree. But the value of the narrative is not measured by whether someone reaches a certain destination about becoming a billionaire. But what we are classifying as success is that what we are measuring is not just how much money they have, but if they have reached their self goals, if they have reached a certain extent of their life, which is much better than how it was before. And now this leads to our second contention. Our second contention is the American dream drives institutional reform. Narratives are very important because they shape society. And the narratives determine what societies believe is desirable, and therefore what governments, schools, and other public institutions choose to promote. When the majority of society accepts a particular value and everyone starts believing in that value, that is what leads to reform. And we already observe this in so many different areas. Today, for example, racism is widely condemned because the society first developed a shared belief that racial equality is morally important. That dominant narrative eventually evolved into actual actions by the government by making anti-discrimination laws, educational reforms, workplace protections, and public campaigns against racism.
Point.
Therefore, the mechanism applies here again. No, thank you. If the dominant narrative becomes that effort and perseverance deserve opportunities, then the institutions will be more likely to create systems that allow individuals to succeed through merit and not just connections or money. Even if society is unequal, the American dream provides a narrative that pushes the people to demand fair systems. For example, it is easier to criticize nepotism when society agrees that everyone deserves an equal chance and work matters more than your place of birth. Because if society told you, oh, you can only succeed with if you're only born in a rich family, then encouraged. Of course, we will think, oh, I can't do it because my family's not rich. How can I go all the way up there? How can I succeed? However, with the American dream, this mindset will not work because everyone will think that they have an equal chance and they are able to succeed as well. Over time, this creates a society where opportunity is not only encouraged culturally, but also reinforced institutionally. And the American dream, therefore, does not simply motivate individuals today, but it can gradually shape better schools, stronger educational investment, and institutions that continuously expand opportunities for not just right now, but for the future generation and the generation after that. Expanding on the American dream mechanism. The American dream mechanism reminds people that although success is never guaranteed, effort is still worthwhile because individuals retain a meaningful agency over their future. The American dream gives people the mindset that we have the choice over our future. What our actions do can determine our future. Even if not everyone ultimately reaches the same destination of becoming a billionaire, the society that encourages hope, ambition, and perseverance will always generate more innovation, productivity, and social mobility than one dominated by resignation and fatalism. For all these reasons, very proud to stand on the proposition side. Thank you.
We are not against hard work. We are against a lie that flatters the winners and blames everyone else. So in my speech today, there will first be a few points of framing, and then I'll move on to my 2 points. Number one, on how the American dream transforms structural inequality to personal failure. And number two, the American dream narrows the definition of success. Rebuttals will be integrated into my points. So first on framing, let's be very clear from the start, right? Opposition is not saying that ambition is bad. We are not saying that people should not sacrifice, take risks, or work hard. And we're definitely not saying that success should be discouraged. What we oppose is what the American dream implies when it becomes the dominant narrative in society, right? That we think the implication would look like if you sacrifice enough, take enough risks, and work hard enough, you can eventually 100% become successful. Now, on the surface, this obviously sounds motivating, but then the moment this becomes like the main story that a society tells, it does something so much bigger than just motivate people, right? It teaches people how to explain inequality. It tells us the rich are rich because they are disciplined, brave, visionary, and deserving. And it tells us the poor are poor because they're lazy, irresponsible, and passive, or lacking in ambition. And that is the real debate today, I feel like, because this is not about the private mindset. It is just about the public moral framework, and it shapes who society admires, who society blames, and also what society thinks it owes people, right? So a more realistic frame of what the American dream actually looks like in the modern society, it looks like this. In schools, children are told that if they study hard enough, they can become anything. In politics, leaders say ordinary people do not need welfare or redistribution. They need discipline, entrepreneurship, and opportunity because of the American dream. And in workplaces, people are told to be to accept hustle, to accept sacrifice, work longer hours, and invest in themselves because supposedly success is available to everybody. And in media, society just celebrates the self-made billionaire, the immigrant who came with nothing, the student who escaped poverty, etc. And notice the pattern that all of these stories do not celebrate the effort. They quietly suggest that those who did not make it must have failed to do not enough. So then yes, the American dream inspires, but at the same time, it also judges. So now moving on to my counter narrative, I think on opposition, our side does not want a society without ambition, right? We want a society with a more honest and humane dominant narrative that people should work hard, but their life chances are heavily shaped by the condition that societies give them. And therefore, society has a collective duty to build fair institutions, protect people from poverty, and value human dignity beyond economic success. That is our world, in which we think that effort matters, but structure matters too. Right? Now, moving on, I feel like our winning metric today is that what dominant narrative creates a more fair, humane, and more truthful society, right? And now moving on to my points. Number one, on how the American dream turns structural inequality into personal virtue and personal failure. I would like to directly say that this clashes against Prop's main point about how saying the American dream motivates people. Prop can say that, oh, we can't change it anyways, but at least under our side, people will try hard despite their circumstances. Three things. Number one, the narrative also turned into self-blame and communities isolating you, right? You blame yourself for not working hard enough. People around you blame you for not working hard enough. Look at Elon Musk making it all coming all the way from South Africa. Mental health inequality, like you practically don't really get much of that. And you don't go on demand for like fair pay and protection. Number two, we tell you that there will be lower political will for change, which I'll explain later. And number three, that we tell you that op still gives better motivation because we give you a more realistic agency, right? Op gives collective agency. We organize
Point.
votes, unionize, prioritize, and demand better schools, which I'll also explain. Before I move on to my point, I'll take a quick POI. 3, 2,
You have stated that we tell students that if they study, then they can be anything. Then what is the opposition proposing that we tell otherwise?
I think that for teaching school kids, we are teaching them, obviously, that working hard is good, right? But working hard doesn't necessarily 100% mean success. Which brings me to my first layer, where I feel like in the real world, outcomes are shaped by far more than work ethic. They're shaped by family wealth, good or bad schools, healthcare, network, race, gender, etc., etc. There's an infinite list here. But the American dream compresses all of that into one single formula of hard work plus sacrifice equals to success, which this is like essentially attractive because it's so simple, but then it's also false because essentially this false narrative is so dangerous when they become dominant because they teach entire societies to read unfair outcomes as fair, right? And number two, we think that it moralizes wealth and poverty. This is where the narrative becomes extremely toxic because if success is mainly a reward for effort and courage, then rich people are not just fortunate. They just become like very morally admirable. And they're seen as more disciplined, more visionary, more deserving. And at the same time, poor people are not just unlucky or blocked by structure. They become like morally not correct. They're seen as lazy or something like that. And so once this happens, people lose empathy for those who are in poverty and those who are actually experiencing structural systemic inequality and structural issues, right? And this brings me to my third layer of how this weakens support for redistribution, welfare, and structural reform. This is a practical impact here, that a dominant narrative is never neutral. It is produced, repeated, and enforced by people with institutional power. So when the American dream becomes dominant, it is not just a comforting story told by ordinary people to motivate themselves. It becomes like a top-down ideology used by employers, politicians, schools, medias, wealthy elites to discipline ordinary people into accepting inequality. The dominant narrative do not just shape like ordinary feelings, it now also shapes policies. So if society believes success mostly reflects personal virtue, then redistribution feels unfair, right? And so there will be less and less policies on welfare, on redistribution, on compensating these poorer people. And that is exactly why the American dream is so politically useful for people in power, because it makes inequality so much easier to defend, right?
Point.
Now moving on to my second point, it's protected time. So moving on to my second point about how the American dream narrows human worth to economic success and turns society into a permanent performance, right? So three things to this. Number one, I feel like it defines the good life too narrowly. The American dream pretends to be about freedom, but in reality, it's just economics, like economic success, right? It's just like, upward mobility, ownership, career status, etc. But then people who do not fit into that model are treated as if they aimed too low and failed to push hard enough. But many meaningful lives are not built around chasing maximum income or status, right? A teacher, a caregiver, and a social worker, these are all people who want stable, modest lives and is not any less valuable. And our side says that society should not organize dignity around market success. Right? And number two, then, that I feel like the American dream also glamorizes burnout and that it's so it fits so neatly within the modern hustle culture. And that is essentially just not healthy ambition. It's just internalizing the pressure in society. Proud to oppose.
Judge, many social values such as equality, justice, and freedom are existing in the status quo, but none are perfectly achieved, but society still promote them because they shape behavior. PM has already told you that success we are talking about is not same for everyone. We told you it rather looks like having a better life than before, becoming a better version of yourself, rather than self-comparing with other people, better than having an objective standard. This means that it rather focus on personal fulfillments, so all of these arguments about how unrealistic these expectations are and how toxic American dreams are unrealistic. However, we'll still try to rebut. Moving on to rebuttals, government says that we overlook systematic issues. However, we never claim effort is sufficient. We only claim effort remains necessary. And what do I mean by this is that you still have the chance to give the still have the chance to have the opportunity and have the hope to look for the success when they think that they put the efforts. There is a difference between saying that hard work guarantees success and hard work increases opportunity and should remain socially encouraged. We still take care for lower class citizens. Why is this so? Because there are a few premises. First of all, most countries are mostly consistent with majority on low and middle class and minority and high class. And second, politicians are vote based. And lastly, votes are fairly distributed to everyone regardless of their classes. This means that many politicians are still incentivized to make policies that subsidize and help these lower class citizens and help their opportunities and solve systematic issues. All of their argument about how it's unrealistic that we're going to solve systematic inequality fails. Then moving on to their another argument about how their side will have a good subsidies, but no thank you. In their very best case scenario, let's say that their side have very good subsidies and have all of these movement to solve the systematic inequality. But note how, what's the point when the lower class citizens do not have the hope and motivation to opt into the subsidies and opportunities in the first place? Only with American Dream, only with these narratives that link effort to success, that's when individuals have the hope and motivation to catch up the elite classes and have the motivation by having emotional support, saying that if I put enough effort, then I might have success, then I might have a better version of myself. I'll take the PUI.
Don't you think that governments tend to invest on the more promising entrepreneurship leaders because American dreams is centered around economic success according to our characterization? They're not focusing on normal people. The investment and government subsidies not focusing on normal people on your side. Don't you
I think
so?
you didn't listen to our characterization about how politicians are vote-based. Note how votes are fairly distributed to everyone regardless of their classes. This means that politicians have a heavy interest and heavy incentive to give policies that are subsidizing individuals to help them to opt into these opportunities and help them to survive these systematic inequalities. Politicians only care about their votes. It doesn't matter if they really help them or not, but it's more on how they care about these individuals, and this shows that our side still have systematic support for lower class citizens, even if American Dream is a predominant narrative in the South Korea. Then, what makes American Dream unique is that people are already aware of inequality in nowadays. This means that there's a social phenomenon we see in the nowadays, so we don't really need another reminder of inequality. They are already aware it. Another reminder is rather like a psychological harm for lower class citizens. So what we need in the South Korea is a support, is a hope and a motivation that what they put as a effort will be linked to success itself. Also, note how the American Dream keep people inside institution rather than against institution. The American Dream says upward mobility should occur through participation, for example, education, jobs, entrepreneurship. Note how counter narratives such as things that opposition want to imply, for example, institutions themselves are fundamentally biased. Yes, institution may be the one that are biased, but note how this debate is a narrative debate. What matters is what people believe in. Even if there is no narrative that institutions themselves are fundamentally biased, it's a common social phenomena that we see in the South Korea, and there are people, for example, as I mentioned before, the vote-based politicians who are willing to solve these and solve this. Then the thing that are missing in the South Korea is a hope and motivation for these individuals to opt into this opportunity and catch up to the elites. If institutions are viewed as a source of problem, individuals become less willing to trust them or invest in them, and these institutions will turn their back to these lower class citizens, and that's the route where these individuals will not get the help that they need. Moving on to our last argument about how the American Dream weakens elite class circulation. Elites naturally attempt to preserve themselves In every society, individuals with wealth and influence have incentives to maintain their position because losing status means losing economic and political benefits. They do this through A, passing wealth to children, B, using connection and networks like university legacy system, and controlling prestigious educational and professional spaces, and lastly, creating informal barriers to entry. This already appears through phenomena like nepotism and political families, where influence repeatedly remains concentrated with the same circle. Left unchecked, society gradually moves toward a system where background increasingly determines outcomes. Then, the American dream creates a competing social expectation. This is the reason why American dream is very unique and is needed in the society. Success should be justified through contribution and achievement rather than inheritance. This changes behavior in two ways. Firstly, people outside elite groups continue entering competition because they perceive upward movement as legitimate and possible. In our very worst case, let's say this fails. However, people still try to attempt. What we at least give is the attempt and a try and an opportunity. For example, first-generation students, immigrants, entrepreneurship, lower-income individuals investing in skills, all of these is a trial, and this at least create a 0.1%. However, in their side, no one tries, and there is a 0%. I believe that 0.1% is much more better off than 0%. Second, elite themselves face pressure to justify their position. Society increasingly criticizes inherited advantage. The existence of terms like nepo babies demonstrates this pressure and is a living evidence. These labels emerge because society already view purely inherited success as less legitimate than earned success. Increased circulation of opportunity prevents institutional closure. What do I mean by this? When individuals from different backgrounds repeatedly challenge pre-existing groups, institutions become less exclusive and opportunities circulate more broadly and power become less concentrated. And even if inequality still exists, power no longer remains permanently trapped within the same families, and these individuals also have the mindset that they will be competed against and they'll be more acting towards a better goal, better achievements, and this also includes politicians, and we believe that that's how we make a better society. Proud to propose.
A girl from United States come to Barack Obama and told him, "Can you help me? Because I'm in a phase of feminist discrimination in the job market. I'm facing a lot of inequality." Obama said, "Yes, we can." But he is not using the narrative of American dream, because America right now in the status quo is a mix of different narratives. However, if their side is trying to propose the American dream as a dominant narrative, we think it's going to cause a lot of problem. Sticking to the framing by my first speaker and also providing some basic responses as well as one piece of extension, I'd like to start today's very speech. First question here, what is the biggest question in this debate? Our opponent didn't answer this question. So our side burden is to tell you the biggest question in this debate is what society values, right? My first speaker tells you that what society values as a whole, what each individual society is working towards, that ultimate goal is the main problem in this debate. So the majority of the normal people are, a handful of people will fail because with the American dreams, they're simply sacrificing and working hard. But the American societal structure decides that there's still a lot of possibility that they can fail. So the question comes today, whoever can solve the shared problems and challenges of society better and shall win this debate. Therefore, our counterfactual is actually more feasible and not cheating to people with a bubble of words. Our opponents, the key difference between the narrative of opposition side and proposition side is deciding that a focus and ultimate goal of individuals and normal people shall be economic success. They didn't tell it explicitly. However, in reality, in the status quo, they're using countless examples like Steve Jobs, like Jeff Bezos, like every one of these entrepreneurship, like these economic success in the dominant narrative of the part of the American dream of the American society. Opposition offers a counter narrative. We don't want a society without ambition. We want a society where the dominant narrative is a more honest and humane one. Society has a collective duty to build fairer institutions, protect people from poverty, and value human dignity beyond economic success. Therefore, every one of society, including the upper classes, including the politicians, the lawmakers, and the normal people, are our audiences. But the difference here is proposition is only giving the audiences to the normal people, and they're cheating the normal people, which will bring to the second layer, adding up to the characterization, what American dream is really look like. American dream is not true. because the American society is characterized by, firstly, capitalism, where class and financial ability are the true barriers, are the natural barriers of the people. So when you tell the people that you sacrifice and work hard, you will succeed, this is actually not true, because the larger possibility shall still be considered about your luck, what you start with, and these three factors, your hard work, what you start with, and starting with other factors, your luck, are all the factors that should be considered. Our narrative accomplishes it, but American Dream is only focusing on hard work and sacrifice. The second one, wealth gap is great. And the third one, social problems in America are urgent, right? Poverty, unemployment, and polarization in politics are all the ultimate goals of the American society to solve. However, with their narrative, they're only focusing on economic success when they do that in practice. But as we can tell you, that our narrative is focusing more on the general collective groups of the society to solve the social problems, which will lead to my rebuttal. After the rebuttal, I'd like to take a POI. The rebuttal is, I'm first rebutting to our opponent's point about not telling people that effort is everything or thing. They believe that their characterization of their narrative is like this. However, it is not likely for the sake of characterization of the motion. The motion says dominant narrative. What does it mean by dominant narrative? It means that American Dream is appearing in every newspaper, every propaganda, and every speech of a president. Even if these media don't state it explicitly, they also imply about it. Therefore, it is infiltrating into the daily life and overshadowing other rational narratives. So they're telling about a problem, they're going extreme. They're proposing a case that's letting it become the dominant narrative of the whole society that is overshadowing any other narratives that is not the status quo of the United States. But then they tell you that the circulation of wealth and the status that people tend to maintain is also very important. I quite didn't understand this point, because American Dream is not just a narrative. It is just a narrative, right? It is not changing the polarized system because you're just telling normal people to work hard. However, our narrative is also, besides telling normal people to work hard or be realistic, we're also telling the politicians to do something for the collective interests of the society. So it is we that are changing the institutional values. It is we that our current counter narrative is directed towards politicians and system, while our opponents simply miss out on a point without changing the system. Answer to mobility, also one of their main arguments about courage. Well, this argument is not exclusive on their side. Our counterfactual narrative is more encouraging because people see this more accomplishable and concerning every interest of the society, which is a larger scale. Also, our counterfactual narrative is more realistic. People have no risk of losing belief and meaning. And in my extension speech will further explain why in the long run, people are more likely to be discouraged. Also, the last piece of answer is on institutional worth. The belief that they can reform the institutional system. However, as we have stated, firstly, our counterfactual is better. And second, focus is on self-economic success of American Dream. American Dream is individualism. American Dream looks like telling people that sacrificing is the only pathway to economic success. Examples in Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs. However, it is not true. Investments will center around enterprise starters and scientists and other people whose status starts with more and more promising to succeed. Why? Because politicians also want their policy to seem prettier. They want to tell the opponents, they want to tell the rivals and voters of the community that we have succeeded a lot. However, the reality is not like this. Politicians are vote-based. Well, election is a short term. But we are focusing more on the long term. And entrepreneurships can help the politicians more, actually, than the normal people. Nation and financial support that each election will really demand. So governments will tend to focus more on the entrepreneurship and other people who has increased the polarization, inequality of the American situation. I'll take a point. Oh, it's protected time. I'm sorry. My extension is people's risk of losing belief and meaning in life is more possible. Three premises. The first premise is American Dream's overrepresentation. It is a romanticization that is not true. It emphasizes a lot about sacrificing, saying that if you're working hard, you'll definitely succeed financially, implying that I deal in every newspaper, an article, and every exhilarating speech of the President of the United States of America, and therefore solidifying the mindset in people's thinking. But secondly, I think the reality, luck is another factor, right? When you break into the final of this debate tournament, motion has to be fitting. You have to get a lot of luck. What you begin with is another factor, right? The class is another factor. Jeff Bezos doesn't begin open-handed. Jeff Bezos begins with a middle high income family. And third one, who uses this narrative? The politicians that want to win the support of normal people who are being cheated by them are using the narrative. But the reality is it is not true. Political manipulation of using this narrative is obvious. People are trapped in a bubble because most people intuitively follow the trend. They read about American Dream's implications every single day. One day, when people discover that this is not true, they will feel discouraged. They'll feel loss of meaning in life and loss of belief in life. Three impacts very quickly. First is that decreasing productivity in the long term. Second, distrust in institutions. And third, people's will to survive, especially for the middle class who have dedicated the entire life in their career and find them career to be fake will be discouraged. We're so proud to oppose.
Side proposition is not defending a world where the American dream perfectly comes true. What we are defending is a world where the American dream becomes a dominant narrative that becomes a valuable aspiration for society to uphold, where people believe that hard work pays off at the end. A dominant narrative does not act as a description of reality, but rather a vision that society collectively strives to achieve. As I wrote on my speech, I'll bring up 3 key clash points of today's debate. First, on the effects of hope in modern society. Second, on the effects to society. Third, on reform, introducing the reasons as to why your ballot should go to side proposition. With that being said, our first clash point is on the effects of hope in modern society. We tell you through our first argument that the American dream narrative drives motivation and gives hope to self-doubting individuals. We characterize a world as an era of Tangping generations where people are increasingly being depressed and self-doubting, like the example of South Korea. We tell you how if the majority of the population believes in the narrative that hard work pays off, this motivates people, gives hope, and sets a culture where people believe that they can shape the future, which impacts the entire country's economic output at a bigger scope. They try to respond to this by saying that although they are not against hard work or hope, but that this narrative is counterproductive and leads people to overwork themselves due to false hope. However, this argument is a misrepresentation and a mischaracterization of what the American dream actually looks like. As our first speaker has explained during her characterization, that success that the American dream talks about does not 100% guarantee a person to be in the top 1% just because they worked harder. Rather, we tell you how success identified in the American dream simply talks about having better standards of living than before. Side opposition fails to respond to how American dream never advocates for extreme ideologies or of success, but rather that success looks different from everyone and that success just means a better version of yourself and better living standards than before. In addition, while side opposition states that success is unachievable, we think that this kind of success that the American dream characterizes is actually achievable as hard work does lead to change in reality. We also disagree with side opposition's point on how hope has a negative effect on people. Like the famous quote that talks about how hard work never betrays you, we see how people get motivated by hope rather than get discouraged. We also see motivational videos on YouTube that stresses hard work. People consume and watch these videos because hope acts as a motivating factor rather than a discouragement. Before I move on, I'll take your point. Why does elite embarrassment matter if they still keep the money, institutions, and gatekeeping powers? In other words, if public criticism alone worked, why do nepotism and inherited privilege remain so durable? Yeah, that is what I will be explaining in my second clash point. So to break this first clash point, we break this clash because we outweigh in probability. In the current world, people see hope as a motivational factor rather than a source of discouragement, as we've shown you through the examples of those famous quotes and YouTube videos. While side opposition focuses on a false narrative that motivation, even if it only guarantees a not so extreme success, will automatically lead to burnout and discouragement. Now, moving on to our second clash point. Our second clash point is on the effects of the American dream to society. We tell you through our second argument that narrative shapes society and that narrative leads to real change in society. For instance, compared to the past, in modern society, the main narrative is that racism and sexism is offensive, harmful, and unacceptable. Because the majority of society believes in these narratives, reforms can happen to stop discrimination in schools and the workplace. We think that the same applies when it comes to the narrative of American dream. Even if society is unequal in the status quo, the American dream provides a narrative that pushes people to demand fair systems. For instance, it is easier to criticize nepotism when when all society agrees that everyone deserves equal chance and that work matters more than your birthplace. Side opposition tries to respond to this by saying that the American dream will just work to justify power and powerful people will just be seen as someone who is deserving since they gained that position through hard work. However, I think that I think that there are two kinds of powerful people, and we need to distinguish them. There are CEOs that gain that position. Firstly, there are CEOs that gain that position through inheritance and money. Those people will be seen as undeserving or considered less than the CEOs that gain that position through hard work. Thus, we think that this argument is turned because people will now condemn CEOs that gain their position through birth rather than praising them as deserving. The second type of power that people who gain power are people who gain that power through hard work. We already see self-made CEOs in today's world, and I think that through our house, those self-made CEOs will be preferred or praised more than the CEOs that came from already powerful families. The third and final clash point is on reform. We tell you through our third argument that if we change the narrative of the current world, it leads to reform. American Dream provides a narrative that pushes people to demand for fairer systems. For instance, it is easier to criticize nepotism when society agrees that everyone deserves equal chances and that work matters more than your birthplace. This looks in society like during college acceptance or job acceptances that hard work is prioritized and your socio-economic status is considered during selection process, which leads to a fairer system that gives opportunities to underserved people. So at the end of the day, side opposition's whole case focuses on a flawed extreme narrative that states everyone can get 100% on a test and that everyone can become the top 1% while ignoring the real characterization of what success looks like and how success looks different for everyone. So opposition's best case is some people overworking themselves because of false hope and wealthy CEOs being praised, while our best case outweighs theirs as we affect people who work harder, lead to better economic output that betters the country as a whole, and how people being selected during job and college process are being more fair because institutions factor out the income of your family and prioritize hard work over your birthplace. And lastly, how lower underserved communities gain hope to work harder, which becoming a better version of themselves. Our impacts affect everyone in society to become fair and just, so proud to affirm.
The premise of Proposition's entire case is that they frame the American dream on their side as something that is increasingly rational, something that does not push people to the extremes. Now, even if you buy this premise, Judge, let me tell you that although their purpose may start out extremely good, because of the nature of the society that we live in, eventually it's still going to turn out something extremely irrational and extremely extreme and extremely radical. Why? Two reasons. First of all, there is already competition in the status quo, as they admit themselves. So, currently, if you need to succeed, you need a lot of things. You need luck to be on our side. You need your abilities. You need a lot of, for instance, financial backgrounds. You need a lot of relationships. But right now, if we give you an equation that hard work equals success, this seems already like a shortcut to a lot of people. Therefore, people will start to push themselves to further limits, push themselves to their extreme points because they believe that right now, hard work directly means success. But why will people even believe in hard work equals success? This is due to the second point, which we believe that there is a tendency for people in the 21st century who are already extremely familiar with social media, familiar with peer pressure, all those things. They have this tendency to opt and to believe in simplified hashtags and slogans. If you give them something like practice makes perfect, they are likely to believe in the things. So even if our proposition frames it as something that is extremely rational, we believe that in real life, the American dream will still end up as something that is irrational. But first of all, a clarification. Tell you that part of the uniqueness that the American dream has is credited due to it being one of the greatest unique points and greatest most viral ideologies. However, it is not the most suitable ideology because it goes to extreme. And we believe that if we truly want to create some concrete impact to make people more equal, to decrease inequality and discrimination in status quo, we should opt for more suitable ideologies instead of the most viral ideologies, because if you are opting for something that is linked with social media, linked with trends, linked even with politics, we don't believe that this can systematically, progressively change a stereotype that has already been deeply rooted within society, especially one such as the American society, right? But moving on to clashes, right? I think the first clash is whether motivation in status quo can really fundamentally create some change. I think that although it can create some change, there are three reasons why we still win this clash. Because look, first of all, if people can't succeed simply because they suddenly have more motivation, if they're already so close to success that having more motivation can guarantee success, we tend to believe that these kind of people start off better, right? Originally, they're still better off in the first place. You do not decrease inequality or actually increase the number of people that actually succeed, because if you merely require confidence in yourself to succeed, you still start off better. And secondly, they didn't give you examples of CEO and self-made millionaires and billionaires, but we believe even in their ideal scenario, the best case scenario, at the end of the day, these people are still in the minority. Because, yeah, quote unquote, everyone deserves equal chances. But in the status quo, there are much more things that matter than simply chances, right? There are lucks, there are luck, there is choices, there are even your ability, right? So we still believe that these people who are self-made millionaires remain in the minority. But thirdly, the majority of people will, like, if you give them this motivation and they still end up a failure, right? We believe that this will even hurt them more. It will hurt them from the very fundamental part of their life and how they value themselves as a human being, because they now feel that nothing can actually save them from society. They tried everything. They tried hard work. They tried what is the crucial driving factor of society according to the American dream, and they had motivation themselves. But because of this or that, they still end up a failure. So we believe for these reasons, motivation can cause serious backlash. But then, moving on, another reason why motivation actually does not succeed in status quo is, as our previous speakers mentioned to you, the structural disequalities, the structural oppressiveness in status quo. And why is this like opposition's strongest point? Again, we have three reasons. First of all, it's because under their narrative, people don't even realize that what impedes them from success is actually societal values and societal inequality, right? They believe that their failures all due to the fact that they are not trying hard enough. They are blaming themselves. They have guilt, they have self-blame, etc., etc., etc. But then B, it's because the political will for change will decrease. If the American dream becomes an idea that is basically worshipped because it's a dominant factor in society, politicians are likely going to turn it into propaganda and campaigning so that they can get into those like institutional positions, right? So therefore, promises for changing society will change into promises for changing people's mindset so that more people worship this kind of American ideal. But then thirdly, we still tell you that even if you do not buy all those layers above, opposition is more realistic in agency because it's easier to change structural inequality when people know that what impeding them from success is actually structural inequality instead of a narrative where people don't know that it's even there. Right. I'll take a quick BOI. 3, 2.
BOI. If hope is discouraging, why do people watch motivational videos and develop quotes that praise hard work to gain motivation?
Because in the status quo, there is equal amount of attention going to luck, ability, and choices, like in respectiveness to hard work, instead of only prioritizing hard work over all those other factors, right? Okay, so after we've talked about how much change is actually brought to like the society, now let's see what kind of change is actually brought to society, right? We tell you that at the end of the day, the American dream prioritizes economic success because the ideal was developed. It stems from a time where material advantage determines how far a person can go, right? American society was like that when the American dream was developed. However, in the status quo, economic success is not the only thing people value. Sometimes it's not even the majority of things that people value. Now people value, for instance, how they are treated, like how their relationship turns out with each other, etc., etc. And these things are also crucial, much less say major parts of a diverse life experience that the American dream actually left out because it's so keen on prioritizing and emphasizing one sole thing, and that is economic success. So even if you succeed in their narrative, so by all of what they say, you succeed in having economic success, you become that like 1 in a million self-made billionaire, the success might not be as qualified as in our counter narrative where you balance economic success with also a lot of different fruitful ideas that you actually gain from your daily life when we do not have this narrative. Therefore, we win in existence of change, we win in direction of change, we win in degree in change, and we also win in value of change, never prouder to oppose.
We don't want people to fall asleep in American dream, but wake up in night America. We're so proud to oppose. From this framing, sticking to my first speaker and my third speaker whole framing, I'd like to provide three things in my speech. The first is the biggest question in this debate. Second, call outs to the moral issues of proposition. And third, the worst case, best case scenario comparison between the two sides. I'd like to first begin with the biggest question. What is this debate answering? What is truly the intention of our motion today? The biggest question in this debate is whoever can solve the shared problems and challenges of the society better. The poverty, unemployment, and polarization in politics characterized largely by the capitalist society of the United States of America. Our framing is the narrative should be focused on societal change rather than individual success, which the American dream did. The collective interest of all communities, classes, groups, genders, races, and cultural identities shall be the main thing of this narrative rather than simply individual success, whatever individual success is. Even if our opponent tried to recharacterize individual success under the context of American dream as non-economic success, it is still individual success. However, even if they can solve this, the scale of the audiences, the scale of our impact is still larger in this debate, and we answered this biggest question in this debate better. Moving on to the second thing in this speech about a call out to the moral issues of proposition. Proposition left the following moral issues unsolved, and they will not solve it with a dominant role of American dream in every newspaper and every one of the speeches of the President of the United States. They're not changing the system and social structure of America. They're letting the wealth gap to be intensive, which are the natural barrier for the middle class and low middle class people. Second, they're discouraging people's meaning of life in the long term because people will actually discover that American dream is not true, and the majority of them is still going to fail. Because sacrificing does not 100% lead to success. However, if you overemphasize this relation, you are causing this kind of long-term impact. Thirdly, they are allowing for political manipulation with populist approaches, as I have stated in my extension speech. And fourthly, they're cheating people with a bubble that infiltrates into their daily life. But even if they don't buy this, they still face one major problem, one ultimate moral issue that they cannot resolve with their dominant narrative of American dream that is overshadowing any other alternative by our framing, is that they are distracting public attention from social change, which will lead to my comparison of the scenarios. Let's compare the counter narratives together. Our opponent's narrative is American dream. American dream is just dominantly pursuing people that sacrificing and doing hard work is definitely going to lead to individual success. So that the society's shared goal is the individual success. Who are the audiences of them? Their audiences are the normal people, right? However, our narrative's audiences are the broad majority of the society. It's every part of the society, every role in the society. We don't want a society without ambition. We just want a society where the dominant narrative is more honest and more humane, where we focus on a collective duty from both politicians and the normal people to build fairer institutions, protect people from poverty and value and human dignity beyond economic success or individual success. Proposition's best case is that people might be encouraged and excited in the short term. However, in the long term, they still face the question. In the long term, people cannot escape the dilemma of losing self-worth, meaning of life, after discovering that American dream is not true. If my father, as a middle-income people, is facing this narrative, I'd rather say that a narrative should not be dominant for my father, who's dedicated his whole life onto a fake scandal. However, opposition's worst case is still that people feel the value in pushing social movements, and politicians, billionaires, and normal people are cooperating together to a society where flowers of unity and win-win flourish. According to Abraham Lincoln, for a society of the people, by the people, for the people that will not perish from earth, we are so proud to oppose. Thank you.
Today's debate has boiled down to one central question. Can the American dream actually provide a good roadmap for the citizens and for the people as a dominant narrative? As the government side, we have been able to successfully prove that it is indeed an effective narrative. Today, I will be comparing this debate through three major clashes and compare how our worlds would look like, ultimately proving to you why your ballot should be placed on the government side. Number one, is the American dream a lie? The opposition continue to argue that if people fail despite believing in this hard work, they will be discouraged. However, what the opposition fails to understand is that, like our DPM has stated already, our society will promote hope, equality, and justice, even though they are not achieved perfectly. Just because there's racism, just because there are criminal cases, just because we experience failure, no one tells us that we are done for and we cannot do anything anymore. We continue to try and pursue these traits, even though they are not perfect. The American dream is the exact same. Of course, people can fail. Of course, not everyone succeeds, but people will still continue to believe in it because it promotes equal opportunities and success based on merit. Number two, what should society award? The opposition continues to argue that poor people will have a lower chance of succeeding because of their family background, wealth, or social status. Therefore, the American dream is a lie or false hope, as they claim. However, the government does not disagree that these barriers do exist. But what our side is believing is that society should reward effort, perseverance, and ambition instead. The American dream establishes a moral principle that people deserve opportunities based on what they do rather than what family they were born into. And even if reality does not perfectly reflect this ideal today, making it a dominant narrative gives society something to aspire toward. Lastly, can the American dream change the system? This is very important because the opposition continue to argue that their narrative can change the system because it will appeal to politicians more than the normal people. But the American dream is just telling the normal people to work hard. Therefore, the American dream narrative is much weaker. However, if the American dream becomes dominant, then the government and politicians will have no choice but to take part in it as well. Voters and the future generation will vote for politicians and representatives that will award people that have succeeded with hard work. The opposition again rebutted to this point by saying that voters are short-term. However, this is just simply not true. If the American dream becomes the dominant perspective, then it will not just affect the current voters It will not just affect the current voters. However, it will affect the future generation and the people that are in schools right now. Even though they do not have votes right now, they can vote in a few years. And then every vote will have voters that care about the society, awarding based on merit, and also give people an equal chance. Now let's take a look at both of our worlds. Our world outweighs theirs in two different ways. Number one, we are much more probable. The opposition arguments stand on a wrong characterization. The reality is that success looks differently to everyone, and the American dream never states that you have to be the top 1%. Success is different to everyone. What we are claiming is that if the person has a self goal and they reach it, or if they're better than their past self, that is success. With that being said, it is a far more likely that hope motivates people than discourage them, as people consume motivational content and give advice regarding the importance of hard work. Side opposition relies on a narrative that people will get burnt out instead, without considering the dynamics in the real world. Because we do consume this type of content. We do consume consume content about hope because it actually motivates and it actually helps us. Lastly, we outweigh in magnitude and scope. Even if some individuals become disappointed and blamed, the benefits of having an entire society self-oriented and motivated, which leads to a higher economic outcome and policy reform, significantly outweigh side opposition at their best case. Therefore, so proud to affirm. Thank you.